My wife suggested an open marriage so she could sleep with other men, and I agreed. But when I started dating other women, she became jealous and begged me to go back to our old marriage. Since I turned 30, I have had the habit of observing my life as if I were a silent spectator, trying to analyze every detail to better understand how I fit into this world. During the last decade, my wife and I have managed to advance in the corporate world in a way I never imagined possible when I had just graduated from university. I remember that in those early years I had not the slightest idea of how much my destiny could change, and, certainly, I did not know the weight that career success would have on my marriage. My parents always said that one should strive to be the best in their professional area, and both my wife and I embodied that advice to the letter, each in their own company, each with their own responsibilities, and each with their respective achievements. I never thought that reaching so high in the corporate world, with its endless meetings, important projects, and public recognitions, could affect us in the way that it did. More than 11 years have passed since the time we first saw each other in the cafeteria of the building where we then worked. She was a new employee in the finance department, and I had already been in the business development area for a couple of years. She had a serious demeanor, very professional, but she still radiated a warmth that captivated anyone. It was that mix of determination and sweetness that made me fall in love. From the beginning, we connected on a level I had never felt with anyone else. During those 11 years of marriage, we were promoted simultaneously, building a comfortable and sophisticated lifestyle. But over time, we were sacrificing certain aspects of our relationship. She always said that there would be room for everything, that our affection would strengthen because we shared similar goals, and I trusted that we would have plenty of time to enjoy life. However, neither she nor I were able to anticipate how the initial spark could fade when each of us became completely immersed in our responsibilities. At first, being a childless marriage seemed like the right decision. The years passed, and we continued to postpone the idea of becoming parents, arguing that the right time would come when our careers stabilized and we had a clear space for raising children. We justified it with the idea that it was better to wait to offer the best to a future child. In that way, each one dedicated themselves completely to their profession, and, somehow, we got used to depending on each other more in the logistical sphere than in the emotional one. We organized our schedules, appeared at business dinners, attended charity events where we projected the image of the successful couple that everyone admired. Still, I was beginning to notice a certain distance in her. For several weeks, my wife behaved strangely. She would come home late, make vague excuses, and although I tried to start conversations about what was happening to her, she always ended up assuring me that everything was fine. She was evasive, and, although my intuition told me that something serious was happening, I could not find a way to find out without pressuring her too much. In the midst of that tension, one ordinary night, after my usual readings in bed, because that is how I relax, with a good book and a tea, she entered the room with a face so serious that I knew instantly that the time had come for an important announcement. She told me we needed to talk, and from her tone I understood that it was not a simple routine chat about the house or the bills. I closed the book and placed it on the nightstand. I felt a knot in my stomach. It was as if something was warning me that things were about to change forever. She took a deep breath and, with a surprising coldness, she dropped the bombshell. She wanted to open the relationship, as she considered that the fire from before had gone out. She explained that she had been thinking about it for months, that she had consulted with her friends, and that, from her experience, she felt that this could be the solution to our stagnation. She did not want a divorce, she told me, but she also did not want to remain in a marriage where the passion had faded. I was left blank. I did not know what to answer. I just listened, unable to articulate the necessary words. Hundreds of memories of our years together flashed through my mind. The trips, the nights when the desire was so strong we could not be apart, the work victories we celebrated with such euphoria. All of that came to my head at once, as if it were crumbling before my eyes. She continued talking, justifying that perhaps I would also realize that I needed to get out of the routine, to look for new things, to explore my individuality without giving up the commitment. It sounded logical enough, but the way she proposed it left me stunned, as I did not feel there was any room for my feelings. It was an ultimatum disguised as a proposal. At the end of her explanation, she said to think about it calmly. She got out of bed, adjusted a lock of her hair, and went to sleep in the guest room, leaving me in that mental void where nothing seemed to make sense. The following days were an emotional whirlwind. Even without having given her a firm answer, I noticed an attitude in my wife as if she had already made the decision and was ready to implement that agreement anyway. Her routine changed. She went out more, she dressed up with more care to go to work, she came back late, and with a shifty look. When I gently confronted her to know what was happening, she would respond with monosyllables or with the typical, "Nothing is wrong. Do not worry." Inside, the uncertainty was eating away at me until one morning, after making myself a very strong coffee to try to clear my mind, I decided to go to my best friend. It was not easy. I felt ashamed to tell him what was happening, because he knew the solidity that my wife and I projected. But I needed advice, or, at least, to talk about it, so that it would not be a simple internal monologue that poisoned me. We met at a discreet cafe. I remember he arrived with a look of bewilderment when he saw me so serious. I was never one to show my problems to others. I used to maintain my composure so that everything seemed to be in order. Then I told him the essential, that she had proposed opening the relationship, that she was very insistent on it, and that I did not know how to handle it. My friend listened to me attentively, nodding and frowning. He told me he understood my surprise, but that my wife was probably not going to change her mind overnight. The way he expressed it made me uneasy, but at the same time it was a call to reality. He gave me advice that I remember word for word. Sometimes life does not make much sense. If you are trapped in this situation, maybe you could try to have fun instead of getting bitter. Do not get stuck in guilt or anger. That will not get you anywhere. His words made me reflect. Was it true that I could not stop my wife's desire to expand our boundaries? Could I somehow take advantage of this idea? That same night, I returned home with my head full of thoughts and a moral weariness that weighed on my shoulders. She was in the living room, watching television, as if nothing was wrong. I sat down next to her, and, without beating around the bush, I told her that I accepted her proposal. At first, she looked at me with a mixture of surprise and relief. I did not know how much she had been waiting for that confirmation, but from her expression I knew that she was excited about the idea. And there the deal was sealed, an open marriage that, according to her plans, would allow us to rekindle passion and individual freedom. However, something inside me broke at that moment. I felt that the commitment we had, that intimate and emotional exclusivity that characterized our marriage, was cracking irreparably. The following days became strange. It seemed that she would get invitations from one day to the next. Suddenly, she had dinners after work or special events in her department, and I began to notice that she was arriving later and later, with the glassy-eyed look of someone who has been in a place she prefers not to describe with details. Little by little I found out, because she herself said it with a certain concealment, that she had encounters with other people, trying to shed her guilt by sharing it with me superficially. She did not go into explicit details, but enough for me to understand what was happening. My reaction, to my own surprise, was one of confusion mixed with curiosity. I did not yet feel the fury or jealousy that one might imagine. Rather, I was in a state of apathy, a bewilderment at the reality that seemed alien to me. During that period, I had not dared to look for anyone else, perhaps because of the cultural and moral weight I still carried. I had the impression that dating other women was something forbidden, although ironically I had agreed to it. Then it happened that at the gym I usually go to in the mornings, a habit I maintained to counteract the sedentariness of the office, I met someone. She was a very attractive and daring woman, with a vibrant personality. The first time we exchanged words was while we were waiting for our turn to use the weight machines. She commented on something about my technique with the weights, and I responded with a shy joke. It was a simple exchange, but it felt natural. The next day we crossed paths again and started talking more. She told me that she worked in digital marketing and that she also considered herself a free spirit. It did not take me long to explain to her, with a bit of embarrassment, the situation I was living in my marriage. I thought she would be scared or that she would think I was making excuses. To my surprise, she took the news with total normality and told me that she understood my circumstances, that life sometimes takes unexpected turns, and that the important thing was to act with honesty. Our understanding was so fluid that, almost without thinking, I began to date her. At first I felt like a novice in matters of conquest, because I had not dated anyone other than my wife for many years. I was aware that this was approved by the new agreement in my relationship, but deep down I carried a mixture of guilt and adrenaline. She, on the other hand, was very relaxed, and little by little she infected me with that carefree attitude. One day, after having dinner at a little frequented restaurant, she invited me to her apartment, and there we had our first deeper encounter. I do not want to go into explicit details, but let us just say it was a very passionate encounter, something I had not felt in a long time. I realized that, as contradictory as it might seem, I was enjoying a facet of myself that I thought was dead. Thus began my new life. At the same time that my wife was going out with others, I also began to see that woman, and, as the weeks went by, I met others. I told each of them before taking any step that I was in an open marriage, and most of them seemed to have no problem with it. I was surprised by the normality with which many people assume these dynamics nowadays. Far from feeling proud, I felt strange because, on the one hand, my married life had lost its traditional sense, and, on the other, I was discovering that there was a part of me that enjoyed that newfound freedom. Sometimes I would return home after seeing someone, and my wife would already be asleep or in the living room, checking her phone. We hardly had any intimate conversations anymore. Everything had become an exchange of implicit permissions and uncomfortable silences. As the months passed, I noticed that my wife began to act very differently. Her attitude, previously enthusiastic about the new agreement, took a radical turn. She began to make claims, to question my outings, and to demand details that she had not been interested in before. Who were you with? What time are you planning to come back? Why did you not tell me before? Those questions began to resonate with more force every day. I, at first, felt bewildered, because in theory we had the green light to enjoy ourselves with other people. However, it seemed that she was not handling that process well now that I was also participating actively. Her discomfort was evident when she said things to me like, "I did not think you would do it so quickly. I did not know it was so easy for you." It was then that I began to realize that the opening of the relationship had been, in large part, a selfish desire of hers, without considering that it could also turn against her. Remember, for more stories like this, subscribe, like, and activate the little bell. Let us continue. Over time, my feelings for her grew cold. It is not that I hated her. I simply lost the emotional connection that once united us. I thought that maybe that distance was just what she was looking for, but seeing her reaction made me doubt. I felt how she was beginning to regret the decision to open the marriage, because she realized that I was no longer so focused on pleasing her, neither emotionally nor physically. For me, the dynamic of a devoted husband, willing to beg for attention, had completely disappeared. My friend's advice, have fun while you can, resonated in my head, and little by little, I made it my own. Still, I could not help but feel a certain resentment when I remembered how she was the one who started it all, and now that the tables had turned, she was trying to stop the outcome that she herself had set in motion. Our coexistence became increasingly tense. Whenever I was about to go out, she would find some excuse to debate my plans. I would reply that I did not have to give explanations for something that we had in principle agreed on together. This triggered constant arguments, angry claims, and accusations that even bordered on the absurd. She began to tell me that I did not care about her feelings, that I was leaving her aside. It seemed unfair to me, considering that she was the one who proposed this new path to me. I no longer had the disposition or the patience to calm her. I had reached the point where I felt liberated from old affections, and I did not care if she got upset, as long as she let me continue with my newfound freedom. One night, after visiting one of my friends, as I began to call the women I was dating to give it a less scandalous nuance, I returned home and found my wife with her eyes swollen from so much crying. She was sitting on the sofa, with the dim light of the lamp illuminating her afflicted face. I sat down next to her, and, before I could say anything, she let out everything she had inside. Between sobs, she confessed to me that she could no longer stand this dynamic, that she needed to close the relationship and go back to what we had before. I tried not to be cold, but the truth is that it was hard for me to feel empathy. I asked her, almost in a mocking tone, what had led her to change her mind so suddenly. Her first words were of reproach towards me, that I had neglected her, that it was not the same to see her go out with someone daily, as to see her return almost without the desire to talk. You do it too, I reminded her. She turned her face and, after a brief silence, admitted that things had not turned out as she had expected. She justified herself by saying that she just wanted to have some fun and that she thought I would not get so involved with other people. Her friends had encouraged her to explore new experiences, to taste the vertigo of conquest. But at some point she realized that the man who seduced her at the office, someone very handsome, with an almost perfect appearance, did not consider her so special. According to what she told me between tears, he had flirted with more coworkers, leaving her aside when someone younger appeared. This revelation made me understand that part of her initial proposal came not only from a desire to rekindle the fire, but from a specific attraction to that man for whom she was willing to do anything, including pushing me into such an extreme situation. Seeing that he discarded her, she went into crisis and wanted to recover the emotional security of our marriage. But it was already too late. With a tone that mixed sarcasm and sincerity, I told her that I was sorry, but that I was not going to close the relationship. In fact, I was already convinced that what I had with her as a marriage had been completely displaced by this new way of living. I had no desire to return to the monotony of before, nor did I have the slightest interest in repairing something that she had destroyed with her thoughtlessness. She looked at me with her eyes soaked, and I knew she realized she had lost control of the situation. She began to insist that I think about it, that it was not fair for her to see everything fall apart. But to me, at that moment, it seemed totally logical that if things had reached that point, the best thing was to break with everything and move on. The weeks that followed were filled with even stronger arguments. Almost every night there were fights over my outings, over my new encounters. She no longer cared to hide her anger or her jealousy. I often heard her complaining loudly, accusing me of having turned her into the cheated woman. I could not help but feel some anger too, as I saw her behave like a victim when she was the one who initiated this chain of events. Although it did seem cruel to me, I was not in the mood to give in. My mind was already elsewhere. I began to think that the best thing was a divorce, because prolonging this agony would bring nothing good for either of us. One day, upon returning from a visit to another of my friends' houses, I found all my things thrown in the living room. There were suitcases with my clothes, boxes with personal belongings, and she was waiting for me with a distraught look. Before I could ask what was happening, she began to shout that she was fed up, that she would not tolerate my behavior for another minute. I replied that if that was her wish, I had no problem leaving. I had already reached my emotional limit with all that tension. With a trembling voice and on the verge of tears, she told me no, that rather she wanted me to be the one to decide whether we closed the marriage or ended it. Her desperation was so evident that I was about to feel sorry, but it was too late. I answered her, with all possible calm, that I was tired of living in that toxicity that we had created. Let us get divorced, I said, without hesitation. Her eyes widened in disbelief, and at first she reacted with more shouts, claiming that I was a coward, that I was not valuing everything we had built. However, when she saw that my determination was firm, she broke down and began to beg me not to abandon her, not to make that impulsive decision. I replied that it was not an impulsive decision, as I had been thinking about it for some time. The conversation dragged on until the early hours of the morning. She insisted on promises of change, saying that she would stop seeing others, that she would erase the people she had been in contact with, all in order to save the marriage. But I had already seen a side of myself that felt fully alive outside of that relationship, and, as cruel as it sounded, I was not willing to return to the emotional captivity that had suffocated me so much. It was at that moment that the divorce process began. At first, she refused to accept the procedures and put up obstacles, postponing signing documents and trying reconciliation meetings with marriage therapists she sought at the last minute. I attended those appointments only to maintain cordiality, but my position was unwavering. In the meetings with the therapist, she told her version of the events, in which she victimized herself and attributed most of the blame to my reactions once we opened the relationship. I limited myself to telling the truth, that everything started because she took the initiative, that she never gave me space to decide, and that now that the consequences were not what was expected, she was trying to backtrack. The therapist made efforts to find points of conciliation, but inside I was already decided. I did not feel anger towards her, but a deep indifference. Meanwhile, my life went on its course. I continued to see several of the women I had met. Some relationships were fleeting, others more constant. The truth is that in that chaos, I found a strange balance. For the first time in a long time, I felt free from the pressures of a marriage that until that moment had revolved around the work world and appearances. When talking to my wife, who was still legally my wife, about household matters, I realized that we did not even recognize each other. We were like two strangers, united by papers and memories. She kept begging, arguing that she did not want to lose that life we had built. My answer was always the same. There is nothing to save. The time came when the legal separation finally materialized. My wife ended up accepting it, as she realized that it was useless to prolong the process. One of the points that used to cause the most conflict in separations, the economic aspect, was not a big problem for us. We had properties and savings, but I was willing to give up whatever was necessary so that there would be no endless fights. Deep down, I wanted to free myself from any tie as quickly as possible. I preferred to give her most of the benefits, even the house. I did not care. I knew I could start over somewhere else, with my own resources, and I did not want to be tied to a property that would constantly remind me of that stage of my life. In the last meeting we had to finalize details. She was completely regretful. After signing the papers, she looked at me with sadness and confessed that it had been foolish to open the relationship, that she did it under the influence of her friends, and because of the obsessive attraction she felt for that man at the office. She commented that she did not think everything would get out of control, and that she would have never imagined that I, the faithful and somewhat routine husband, would dive headfirst into that new lifestyle. I listened to her with serenity. I was not in the mood to reproach her for anything. Everything was already done. I only managed to tell her that I appreciated her sincerity, and that, in short, I owed my new perspective on life to that idea of hers of opening up. You helped me discover what I really like, I confessed, without a tone of mockery or resentment. She burst into tears, repeating that she felt stupid for having ruined everything. For a moment I felt compassion, but also the certainty that there was no going back. When we left the lawyer's office, I saw her walk away with her head bowed, not daring to say goodbye to me with a hug. I, for my part, breathed deeply. I felt a strange emptiness, not the heartbreaking pain one would expect when ending 11 years of marriage, but a kind of relief mixed with nostalgia. After all, she was my partner for more than a decade, and those memories do not dissolve overnight. But I was also aware that I was now starting a completely different stage. Without the legal bond or the emotional tie that united us, I was free to explore the world in a way I had never considered. And although it sounds crude, deep down I was grateful to have gone through that whole whirlwind, as it made me rethink what I wanted from life. After the divorce, I kept the same job for a while. However, my mindset changed. I started looking for new options, perhaps a move to another city, or even to another country that would allow me a new beginning. My work performance was still remarkable, but my motivation was no longer prestige or promotion, but the possibility of managing my own time and space to discover other facets of myself. My close friends were surprised by my change in attitude. Some dared to say that I seemed more relaxed and happy, even though I had just gone through a divorce that, in normal terms, would be something devastating. But I felt that, in a twisted way, everything that had happened had opened my mind to experiences and emotions that for years had been dormant or repressed. Now, not everything was a fairy tale after the separation. I had moments of confusion and fear of loneliness. Sometimes I would wake up in the small apartment I moved into and feel that emptiness of not knowing who to greet first. However, it was also in that loneliness that I began to forge my new identity. I meditated on my mistakes, on my tendency to give in on everything and to put my desires in second place. I recognized that, while my wife had been the one to push for opening the marriage, I had also contributed to the painful outcome by not setting clear boundaries from the beginning. I reflected a lot, trying to find a balance between my newfound freedom and the emotional responsibility that every adult should have. Over time, I continued to frequent those friends with whom I had a certain intimacy, but with more emotional caution. I did not want to hurt anyone or create false expectations. I got involved in long talks with those people who seemed to understand my situation, and thus I learned that each individual manages their relationships and their affections differently. There were those who told me that they felt fulfilled with monogamy, and others who shared that they preferred polyamorous relationships. Knowing different views helped me to get rid of prejudices and to understand that the main problem with my ex-wife was not the opening itself, but the unilateral imposition and the lack of honesty about her real motives. For her part, my ex-wife would contact me from time to time, with various pretexts, that I had forgotten something at the house, that she needed help with a company procedure, or that she would like to have a coffee to catch up. I usually declined her invitations politely, as I did not want to get entangled again in a seesaw of emotions that could reopen old wounds. In one of those rare conversations, she confessed to me that she had started dating that man from the office again, but that she quickly understood that he never had any real interest in formalizing anything, so she preferred to cut it short. She told me that now she felt lonely, and that she envied my ability to rebuild my life. I did not answer anything to that. I just wished her to find the peace she needed. Meanwhile, I was strengthening my bonds with new people. I discovered that I had the possibility to travel without ties. On a 2-week vacation, I took a plane to a paradisiacal place, where I reconnected with myself, far from the stress of the city and the memory of what my married life had been. The experience of walking on the beach at sunset, of feeling the sea breeze and contemplating the horizon without thinking about work meetings or couple arguments was healing. I returned with renewed energy and with a clearer vision of how I wanted to live from now on. Upon my return, my ex-wife tried again to contact me to talk about our past, but I felt that everything had already been said. I replied with a brief message. I wish you the best, but I do not need to stir up what happened. She did not insist further. I understood that I also deserved to set boundaries for my well-being. I realized that it was not necessary to carry resentment. It was just a matter of following my path without looking back unnecessarily. And that was my starting point for what would come next. As my encounters with new people happened, I was carefully selecting with whom to share my time. I had no intention of returning to a marriage in the short term, not even to an exclusive relationship. However, I learned to communicate openly, to be transparent with my intentions. If I felt a genuine interest in someone, I let them know. And if I noticed that they were looking for something that I could not offer, I said it bluntly. I had to decline some promising connections, and, on other occasions, they were the ones who decided that we were not compatible. But in that honest exchange, sincere friendships were forged, and sometimes gratifying moments of intimacy were generated, without that pressure to lie or pretend a monogamy that was not in my immediate horizon. Little by little, my priorities were reordered. I stopped trying so hard to climb the corporate ladder. I had a comfortable standard of living and good savings, so I focused on finding a balance between work and my personal life. I resumed hobbies I had abandoned, like painting and more consistent exercise. I started attending seminars and workshops to expand my skills, from cooking classes to personal development courses. I realized that in these environments, I met people more in line with my search for freedom and growth, and with them it was easy to engage in deep conversations, something that I used to find difficult due to the rigidity of my old routine. To my surprise, I discovered a special passion for hiking. A coworker invited me to a group that organized weekend walks, and I accepted without many expectations. It ended up being a revelation. The connection with nature, the physical challenge of climbing mountains or crossing forests, and the satisfaction of reaching the summit to contemplate breathtaking landscapes. On those hikes, I met people with different stories, many of them with emotional wounds that they were healing just like me. We shared personal anecdotes as we moved through the trees, and, in that intimate and natural environment, I felt understood and supported. There was one particular occasion when, after an exhausting hike, the group camped near a lake. As we talked around the campfire, someone brought up the topic of open relationships and the different ways of understanding love. I could not help but tell my story, avoiding the most sensitive details, but explaining how I had gone from a seemingly stable marriage to an open dynamic, only to end in divorce. I expected some kind of judgment, but instead I received empathy and genuine curiosity. It was a liberating moment, as I understood that my experience, however turbulent it may have been, could also serve as a reflection for others who were considering the complexities of modern relationships. With the divorce completely finalized and my heart in a different phase, I began to understand the true meaning of being grateful for the chapters lived, even those that end painfully. I realized that I did not hold a grudge against my ex-wife. On the contrary, in an act almost of gratitude, I recognized that if she had not had the audacity to propose opening the marriage, I would have never discovered parts of myself that were hidden. For a long time, I dedicated myself to being the good husband and the exemplary professional, forgetting other aspects of my identity. Now I could enjoy life with a broader perspective, knowing that social rules or family expectations did not have to dictate my way of relating to the world. However, I do not romanticize what happened either. I witnessed how much suffering can be generated by the lack of honest communication and selfishness disguised as freedom. The ideal in any relationship, open or not, is clarity of intentions and mutual respect. In my case, my ex-wife's proposal was made unilaterally and with hidden motivations. That led her to an emotional disaster, and it prompted me to cut off that bond that, although it had 11 years of history, was already becoming incompatible with my personal growth. Still, I do not deny the good memories. There were moments in our marriage that I treasure. Our trips, the knowing laughs, the dinners with wine where we planned joint projects. It is all part of my story, and to repress it would be to deny what also made me happy at the time.